Hello, I'm Aaron Matus with D1 Ticker, and one of the major storylines we've seen develop in this young college football season is, of course, stadiums welcoming fans back for the first time in, well, more than a year. And some of these stadiums seemingly not prepared for the large crowds. That gives us an opportunity to welcome in Victor Matheson, professor at Holy Cross. He's also the former president of the North American Association of Sports Economists, as well as the editor of the Journal of Sports Economics. So far more qualified to talk on this topic than I am. And Victor, that's why I want to turn it over to you. Why are there fewer workers on a macro level, and how is that trickling down to our world of college athletics?
Well, so there's two big reasons there. First of all is you have a lot of workers who certainly may not feel comfortable coming back into the labor force at this point, especially at places where you're going to be surrounded by 100,000 folks, at places that you may have large percentage of the population that's not vaccinated. You may have people who have kids at home and have difficulty getting childcare for those kids as child care facilities have been slow coming back, just like lots of places throughout the economy. You also may have issues related with finding workers. And this is not that the workers aren't out there, but this is what in economics is known as a friction, right? And what a friction is that it's not just instantaneous that a new worker is able to find a job or an employer is able to find a worker, even if both people are looking at the same time. And normally something like a stadium, what they count on for a lot of their workers is just workers coming back from the previous year. So they know they're going to have a lot of people leave. In industries like this, you have a lot of churn and a lot of turnover, but you're hoping that a lot of your folks from last year come back for next year. But here we have a situation where we had 2 years in between cycles here for a lot of stadiums, which means you had basically 2 years of melt as your workers drifted away, which means you need to do maybe twice as much hiring this year as normal. And of course, it's just a very, very difficult hiring cycle to be in that way. And of course, they're in huge competition with lots of other industries that are in exactly the same boat as them. Every restaurant out there is facing exactly the same situation where they may have had to let go a lot of workers and now are rapidly trying to scale back up again, but they're in direct competition with these big stadiums. And that just makes it a very, very tough environment to be hiring the, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 workers you might need for a large college football game on game day.
Well, let me ask you about the idea of friction and how that might factor into one of these things we keep hearing from administrators and athletic directors. And maybe it's a factor of competition elsewhere. There's other jobs available, but it sounds like people are expecting workers to show up, and then on game day, they haven't been there. So it's almost as if they were ready for the crowd and then at the last minute realized they weren't. Is there an explanation for that phenomenon as the seasons develop, that workers just aren't showing up?
Well, that certainly could be a case. So, I'm not on the ground there with the workers and the employers there in the big stadiums. But again, kind of the more desperate you are to get workers, as again, lots of industries are, means the kind of the less picky you can be. So rather than being, surviving on, again, these folks that you've had year after year after year coming back for you that you can rely on, what's happened here is when you, again, left for an entire season or when restaurants close down for 3 or 4 months in a row, that group of workers has moved on for you. Those workers that you could count on, they've gone on to other things. And then it's very hard to, figure out who your good, reliable workers are. I suspect things will be better by the end of the season than the beginning of the season. But yeah, it's very challenging for lots of folks, again, trying to hire workers, again, at that kind of minimum wage sort of level that stadiums depend on.
So far from what we've seen this relatively all over. I mean, Virginia, Texas, Northern Illinois, at Louisville, there's been apologies issued by athletic directors for problems with lines. Are you seeing anything regionally, or does this seem to be nationwide?
Oh, this is nationwide, and it comes as no surprise that you're seeing long lines and higher prices for things, right? Again, if you can't hire the workers you need to take tickets, to direct traffic, to provide concessions, you're going to see long lines. You see that in stadiums. And of course, we've seen this like crazy in restaurants where, those restaurants that are finally open and back have much longer waiting times, and just because they can't get staff fast enough, or they just simply close down. So we've seen huge numbers of restaurants instead of opening 7 days a week, now they're only open 6 or 5. Again, simply because of availability of workers. But of course, stadiums don't have that option. They can't say, hey, well, we'll just not open this Saturday, because that's the day they need to be open to welcome in those 100,000 fans walking through the gates.
This isn't an excuse so much as it might be a reason, but what the average fan might not know, that a lot of times it's a third-party vendor that's running these concession stands and running some of the game day operations. So how much of that can contribute to some of these issues on Saturday, that there's just that one extra step of disconnect between the athletic department and the actual event being run, since it is hired out?
Right. And I want to bring up one actually very specific type of third party vendor. Restaurants nationwide in all sorts of situations have had difficulty bringing folks in. So, and it's not any surprise that we've got very long lines at concessions everywhere. But one particular type of vendor that has really shrunk is the nonprofit sector. So at a lot of colleges and other venues, some of the concessions are actually run by volunteers who are raising money for local charities, for the local PTO, or the local soccer team, or any of these sort of things. But that's totally collapsed as well for a whole variety of reasons. Again, to the extent that they're run by kids, with some adult supervision. Again, many of these kids don't even have the opportunity to be vaccinated, which makes parents very reluctant to put them in these situations. Or, they're run by, church organizations or others that depend on older workers who, again, less comfortable in a world where lots of folks aren't vaccinated, and even the vaccines, which are great, aren't a perfect shield against people, especially if you're surrounded by huge numbers of people who are unvaccinated and a lot of the virus. And of course, a lot of college football is taking place exactly in those high virus areas. The 3 highest vaccinated places in the United States are Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And none of those places are big college football hubs, right? You got Boston College here, but it becomes pretty thin pretty quick. But you've got huge surges in virus in Alabama and in Florida and in Georgia and Texas. And of course, we saw LSU finally throw in the towel and say, hey, we can't let anyone in the door unless you can show proof of vaccination. So again, college football is hitting right in those places where you might expect the most difficulty associated with COVID right now.
Yeah, we kind of ripped the Band-Aid right off, didn't we? A lot of these stadiums were certain capacity or zero capacity, in terms of the Big Ten, for example, and we're just kind of all in at this point with 100% capacity. And I wondered if you thought some of that is contributing to many of these issues.
Well, again, two issues there, right? Number one, the comfort level that you might have with serving 20,000 fans might be different if you're a concessionaire serving 100,000 fans. That's certainly one. But again, it's also about getting that hiring in place, right? You've had an entire year where you can have your existing employees drift away from the venue, right? So if you're Michigan, you've had an entire year for those employees that you depend on for game day, part-time game day minimum wage employees. You've given them an entire year to drift off into other sorts of occupations in a way that if they come back after 9 months, they might still be interested, but now you've lost touch with them completely, and so it's just very difficult to get them back. Now, obviously, it's a lot harder to get back enough workers. The 3,000 or 4,000 workers you might need for a packed day at the big house versus the 1,000 workers you might need if you're only letting in 15 or 20,000 fans.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, some of these people may realize they don't need to work Saturdays after they find something else why they couldn't work last year. Interesting piece with the technology at some of these stadiums. We've talked about touchless entry and touchless concession stands, and some of the stadiums are having issues with that, perhaps with welcoming so many people back again. Do you think there's a solution in the future with touchless helping, or is that slowing things down right now? And if it's not something that you're an expert on in terms of that, you can tell me to move on.
Well, of course, we're all a little bit of experts at this, right? Remember 20 years ago, the first time that you went to the airport and you went to you didn't go up to the ticket agent to get your boarding pass, but you went to the kiosk. Pretty much everyone screwed that up the first time, and that's the way the world works, right? It will get better. We're all used to this. Technology is great. We get through the grocery store a lot faster now that there's scanners, even though, those didn't exist at all 30 years ago. And this is not some sort of, crazy witchcraft at this point, but it kind of was at the beginning. And knowing how it works is tricky in the early stages. But again, ultimately, we still don't have a device that will, cook a hot dog, put it on a bun, and slather mustard and hopefully not ketchup, but at least mustard and relish on it, and hand it out to people. And that we don't have. And so, it's not a silver bullet that's going to erase all our problems, even once we figure out how to do that.
Does ketchup belong on a hot dog? Might be another time we have to get you on here for a different discussion. Here's what it all boils down to, right? Solutions. How long are fans going to have to deal with some of these growing pains of welcoming people back to stadiums? How quickly do you think a solution arrives?
Well, of course, the obvious solution, and this is not one that's going to make either teams or fans happy, but the obvious solution, anytime you have a shortage, you just got to raise the price, right? If you need an extra 1,000 workers at your stadium, and you're paying them, $8.25 an hour, I pretty much guarantee you I can find you those extra 1,000 workers as long as you pay them 15 instead of 8. Of course, what that means is less profits for the venues themselves, less profit for the third-party vendors, and more money out of that stadium fans' pocket, right? Hard to believe that a beer at a stadium could get more expensive, but the reality is it could, because of the cost associated with buying enough servers. And so I think that's obviously the real solution here is, pay people to do that until you have a world where people are comfortable working at it at a lower price. But I think another thing that the pandemic has shown people is like, I don't need to do this job for minimum wage anymore. And I'm happy enough doing something else instead. And, I think that's really hit a lot of the hard work, low pay service jobs. And, lugging a whole tray of beer up and down those stairs, for 4 quarters is hard work and not for great pay. And I think a lot of people said, I can do something else for that. Nothing like a little bit of layoff to kind of let you focus your mind on what you really want to be doing.
Let me ask you one follow-up along those lines. Paying more for the work, how reluctant might some of these schools be that lost money by the millions last year when they had to limit or tell fans they couldn't come altogether?
Certainly, I mean, no one is happy to do this, but this is in economics what we call a sunk cost. That's behind you. What you lost last year should have no impact on what is best for you this year. And your choices at this point are to sell less hot dogs, sell less beer, sell less popcorn, because you can't find enough people out there to sell it for you, and at the same time making your fan base unhappy, or pay more for the workers you need to be able to provide that product. I don't know which one is necessarily better. Which one do you want to do? That's not, they have to figure that out kind of on their own. But what happened last year is irrelevant. The question is, what is going to get you those best revenues going forward, and not just about the next game. It's about whether fans want to come back next season. If they say, look, I stood in line for an hour and a half all season because they never got their act together, I don't need those season tickets. And of course, that's a big issue that they should worry about. So It's not just about today's dollars and cents. It's also about, that fan experience. And the worse that fan experience is, the less chance you have of someone coming back, paying that big annual payment just to get on the list to buy tickets at those top places, as well as, the money coming in for the tickets themselves.
Which is why I agree with you that these problems will get ironed out here by season's end, and hopefully for college football fans across the country sooner rather than later. Victor, I want to thank you for joining us. I really appreciated the conversation.
It's my pleasure to be here. And good luck for Holy Cross the rest of the season. We've already knocked off UConn this year. Let's see if we can knock off someone else.
Thank you.